17-year-old Adam knows all too well how hard it is for a homeless youth in the Hunter to find a bed for the night. He's a street kid.
You go to a lot of places sort of thing and they'll knock you back, and then you've sort of got nowhere to go, so you've got to, you just got to go somewhere sort of thing. You don't want to sleep on the streets,
And it's getting harder for street kids to find accommodation in the Hunter, according to a new report by the Youth Accommodation Association of New South Wales. The report found that requests for accommodation for homeless youth in the Hunter almost doubled in the last financial year to reach 1,418. That's the biggest jump in any region in the state. The association says of the more than 1,400 requests for accommodation last year, only 562 were met. That means 6 out of 10 homeless youths in the Hunter looking for a bed were knocked back, and they have to resort to staying in conditions like these. Dave, a 5-year veteran of the streets, says when the refuge's doors are closed, the choices are few.
Just in squats and abandoned houses, earthquake damaged buildings and just places like that, camp out.
The director of the Salvation Army's SOS Centre, Lieutenant John O'Sullivan, says the solution to the lack of accommodation for homeless youth is obvious.
We need more housing for our youth. It's important that they have somewhere that they can go regularly, and therefore we can keep track of them and be able to work with them.
Wally Crawford put Toronto 4 points in front with 2 first-half penalties before the Rosellas hit back in devastating fashion. Brett Hode was in everything for Wests, and his pass went to Greg Price, who sucked the defence, on to Neil Baker, who also drew the cover, and his pass found Morrison backing up and he crashed over for the first try of the match in the 38th minute. Baker's conversion from near touch, and West led 6-4 at the break. The second half belonged to the Rosellas, and it was Hode again who opened up the Scorpions. On to Price, Baker was there in support, and all he had to do was slip the ball to Hubbard on his outside, and the centre did the rest, and West led 12-4. West made a number of breaks and finally sewed it up when replacement Frank Elmer dived across to score close to the posts after the Rosellas had attacked for a long period.
When Bryce Gaudry walked into his office as the state member for Newcastle, he found the filing cabinets were bare. The former member, George Keegan, had cleared out the files when he lost his seat in last month's elections. Mr Gaudry says he's unimpressed by the former member's big clean-out. But Mr Keegan says he was justified in leaving the cabinets empty.
As you go through a job as a member for Newcastle, you collect a lot of trust and and you also collect a lot of information on people's personal problems. And who am I to say that information should be handed on to somebody else? The trust was placed in me.
Mr Keegan says he understands how the new Labor member feels starting from scratch. He had to do the same.
I took over the job in the same condition. There were no files. There was nothing there for me to work to. I didn't have the benefit of the Labor Party to groom me and train me and advise me. I went in on the deep end. It was totally cold.
The new member says he may ask Mr Keegan to return files concerning ongoing issues.
If there are constituents' problems that could be assisted, I'd certainly think it would be a good thing for Newcastle to have those back.
But Mr Keegan says the member for Newcastle would be wasting his time. The new Liberal member for Maitland, Peter Blackmore, also found his files virtually empty, but he sees that as positive. He can start afresh with his constituents. The Legislative Assembly has no policy requiring ousted members to leave the files behind for the new blood. It's just a matter of ethics. So when it came to take it or leave it, some Hunter members decided the files were best left behind. Some people said Ivan Welsh had a touch of sour grapes in what he said after he lost the Swansea seat in last month's elections. But a spokesman for the new member, Don Bowman, said that when it came to office matters, Mr Welsh was meticulous. Not only did he maintain the files, he marked those that were relevant to ongoing issues. Stan Neely, who returns for his second term as the Labor member for Cessnock after 3 years in the wilderness, says his Liberal predecessor, Bob Roberts, passed on files concerning current issues. But Mr Neely, being a seasoned political campaigner, had asked Mr Roberts to keep the files for him. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
Working from the ground up in his father's wrought iron factory in England to setting up a branch of the family business in Australia, Harry Siebel is well qualified to talk management. Most recently known for his open letter to the former Treasurer Paul Keating, imploring that we cannot live on importing goods, Mr Siebel lays a share of the blame for our manufacturing woes on workers.
Unless they really get rid of some of the practices that are causing inflation, and these are manufacturing practices, in terms of flexibility, in terms of hours worked, all those things, penalty rates, and this applies not only to manufacturing but the hospitality industry, restaurants, cafes, the whole thing, we're not going to get anywhere.
But management is also to blame, unwilling to be original and plan simplicity into manufacturing processes.
I think the tendency has been to take things for granted, to say, well, we'll go back to what we did before. Once we can get back to that, everything's going to be right again. It'll be apples. And this doesn't necessarily answer the thing. They've got to start looking afresh at every single thing they do.
There were some grim faces at Knights training today, especially among the backs, who coach Alan McMahon says must take most of the responsibility for the loss to Saints.
I thought our forwards played very well, very reasonable in fact, and probably just some lost opportunity that our backs haven't seen.
Steve Fulmer and Gary Worth have felt the brunt of the selectors' anger. Steve Linane has been called up to take over the kicking duties and the halfback spot, while Adrian Brunker will play on one wing, with Ashley Gordon desperate for a big game at fullback.
People think, he's not playing the way he used to, therefore he must be out of form. So I've set the standard myself, I have to live up to it.
Many have written the Knights off as a semi-final prospect following the loss to St George, but Coach McMahon is looking no further ahead than this weekend's clash with Canberra.
The competition's so very tight, you've just got to take it a game at a time, and your fortunes can change from week to week, as we've seen.
Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
The residents of Mayfield are facing a brick wall. At a public meeting last night, they heard the results of a study they commissioned on samples of dust collected by their own Committee Against Pollution. The study found high levels of iron, a substance not known to have any harmful effects. But the parameters of the study were restricted. The residents simply can't afford the extensive tests necessary to further identify what's in the air over Mayfield and the surrounding suburbs.
Unfortunately, we haven't the money to be able to research this further. You're looking at $500 a test, and that's rather beyond the CAP committee.
And limited finances mean their hands are tied.
Well, all we can do is try to lobby various people to maybe get the test done independently. We'll certainly be trying to get other tests done and find out exactly what is our problem here.
BHP's Max Murray faced the crowd at last night's meeting, promising that steps are being taken to reduce the amount of dust from the steelworks.
We have undertaken to develop a plan and implement planting of additional trees in that area by relocating stockpiles and the Brackets area, which is now existing in the far west, will be relocated inside the east of Torres Strait area next year. That will minimise transport and reduce dust generation.
But the residents are dubious.
BHP's record on environmental controls hasn't been the best in the past, so I would be very surprised to see whether or not everything is done that is required.
Coronation Hill is located in what the Jawoyn Aboriginal people call the sickness country. They oppose mining because they believe it would disturb the great Dreamtime spirit, Bulla, resulting in plague and pestilence.
If we fire and burn, that's what I think we're going to die, all Lord, everybody. We can't live no more. No more America, no more what is England, whatever, what place. We all die, everybody.
The Prime Minister said yesterday those religious beliefs should be respected, a view repeated strongly today by the Minister responsible for presenting the issue to Cabinet.
The law of Australia recognises the interrelationship between Aboriginal religion and their right to their sacred site land.
A prominent backbencher put the counter-argument.
The Labor Party is a secular party, not a religious party, and we should make decisions anywhere about our policies on a basis other than religion.
And one pro-mining minister spoke out before Cabinet convened.
Obviously we need to take into account Aboriginal wishes. I'm not sure that locking up the mine forever necessarily does that.
Mr Hawke went into the meeting supporting option A in the Cabinet submission, to incorporate Coronation Hill and the surrounding area into the Kakadu National Park so it can never be mined.
The time for discussions are over. We don't want to see any further humbug that is going to put more pressure on the Jawoyn people.
Laurie Oakes, Canberra.
While the waterside workers' dispute ground most ports to a halt, Newcastle was largely unaffected. Strike exemptions meant coal loading could continue. Port Waratah loaders worked supplying 3 vessels. Under special negotiations, Australian shipping lines were also unaffected. The BHP's Iron Curtis was discharging alumina. Only 2 vessels were affected, the clipper Mandarin and Summit Venture. Both ships are carrying bulk cargo.
The convenience of having water available at the turn of a tap will now cost Hunter householders $205 each year, up $7 from the old rate. Each litre used will also cost a bit more. From November, each kilolitre will cost 71.8 cents, with an additional charge of 58 cents per kilolitre for sewer use. For the average householder, that will mean a yearly bill of about $485, up $22 from last year's average. Add to that the Water Board's environmental improvement charge of $72.59, and you're looking at a slug of more than $558 for 12 months of tap turning. That's an increase of about 4.8%, less than the current CPI figure of 5.2%. Government departments will face a much steeper rise. They'll now be forced to pay for all the water they use, a move which will add more than $1 million to the Hunter Area Health Service budget.
We think it's the only way to do business. Like the government require a return from us, dividends and in any other form, we expect government departments also to pay their way.
Area health administrators say this won't affect services, but will encourage staff to conserve water. Small businesses may actually save money under the new system. The commercial property value charge will decrease by 6%, and those who use little will pay less.
Those that are located in Hunter Street and the big shopping malls, etc., that had to pay large charges based on their valuations, they're the ones that will benefit.
To attend today's Industrial Commission hearing, dockyard owner Stephen Forjacks had to drive past the pickets that have brought his operation to a virtual standstill. The painters and dockers have been camped outside the Forjacks gates for a week, fighting for the retention of a work roster system operated by the union. But Mr Forjacks has wanted to scrap the roster and have the right to choose who he employs. Frank Cole, on behalf of Forjacks management, asserted the roster posed a threat to more than just the future of the company. Mr Cole told the Commission the work roster system is a threat to the viability of the business, to the job security of 180 employees and to the well-being of Newcastle. Allegations of incompetence and poor attitudes among the painters and dockers at Forjacks were raised in the hearing by the yard's Chief General Manager, James Weatherby. Mr Weatherby told the Commission of so-called ghosts among the painters and dockers at Forjacks, that is, names on the payroll of people who don't exist. Mr Weatherby said one of those names was a Mr Blanche. Mr Blanche, he alleged, was in fact the secretary of the painters and dockers, Sam Milne. Mr Milne, who was in attendance, stood up and angrily declared, "That's a lie." Outside the hearing, Mr Milne said he'd answer those allegations elsewhere.
Yes, I'll be taking them to court.
Commissioner Peterson told the hearing he was prepared to relist the matter for later this week if the union guaranteed a return to work tomorrow. Bob Galligan for the union replied, "That's not possible." The Commissioner then handed down an interim order that Forjacks was exempt from the award clause covering the union's roster system. The Commissioner also strongly recommended the painters and dockers resume work tomorrow, but Sam Milne says that's impossible before a meeting.
There'll be a meeting of the members in the morning, and they'll decide what they do from here.
It was originally to have been held tomorrow morning. Mr Hawke's expected to be closely questioned by MPs dissatisfied with the decision, especially with Mr Hawke's reported role in overriding majority cabinet opinion on the issue. Police Minister Pickering won't tighten gun laws after a shooting spree yesterday that left 3 people wounded. 2 teachers and a girl were shot by a 13-year-old at Orara High School at Coffs Harbour. The boy has been remanded in custody, his father charged with not keeping a firearm safely and having an unlicensed firearm. More talks are scheduled between the Painters and Dockers Union and Forjacks Dockyard in Newcastle to try and resolve a dispute which has led to pickets and work stoppages. Management wants total say on who it hires. The union wants its right of veto to continue.
Several shipping lines are engaged in taking Tomago aluminium products to world markets. The Chinese-owned COSGO line has taken monthly shipments from the port for about 2 years, but next week it will take its final cargo from Newcastle. A company spokesman in Sydney said the high cost of port charges had forced COSGO to cut back on ports of call, and with most of its business in Sydney, there was no alternative but to cancel local operations, even though our costs are significantly lower. A spokesman for the Australian Chamber of Shipping, Noel Hardy, said other shipping companies must be considering similar moves.
So it is. Most ship owners have to go into Sydney anyway with containers, so they'll minimise their costs by just using one port.
The Chamber of Shipping has complained to Transport Minister Bruce Baird that cost-cutting moves by the MSB weren't being passed on to customers. In fact, berthing costs rose 50% last year. The Hunter Ports Authority says reductions have been passed on to the big customers, the bulk coal carriers, who it claims have long subsidised the smaller shipping operators, who are now being asked to pay their way. The spokesman for the MSB declined to appear on camera, but said that while COSGO was a smaller customer, the loss of any trade was regarded as significant. Attempts are being made to get in touch with COSGO management to reopen negotiations. Aluminium shipments left by COSGO are unlikely to be picked up by other operators in Newcastle Port. It's more possible they'll be taken by road or rail to Sydney, where they'll be loaded onto ships there at extra cost.
It's obstructions like these the City Centre Committee wants to banish from the mall. It believes traffic is forcing a mass exodus of shoppers away from the city and towards suburban centres. It hopes to close Wolfe Street and several other crossroads and limit entry to service and delivery vehicles.
We're going to make the rules. We're going to make them. We're going to make them stand very firmly.
Do you think, though, that parking is always going to be the biggest problem the mall has?
Oh, I don't think so. It really has to do with traffic management. During the early morning, the mall is open for trucks to bring in service goods and all the rest of it. But during the day, vehicles shouldn't be here.
But an impromptu survey suggests the committee may be way off the track. It seems parking is a serious problem that leaves bitter memories of city shopping in most people's minds.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. 2-hour parking and sneak back and park again. It's awful.
It does seem to be a problem.
It's a problem. It deters you from coming into town. Yeah, shopping centres make it easier.
What about traffic passing through the mall? Is that a problem for you?
No, I try not to go through the mall at all.
Did you notice a problem today with traffic passing through the mall?
No, not really. No, we didn't.
There's the illusion of a lot of traffic is a whole lot of people going round and round blocks trying to find somewhere to put their cars so they can come and shop.
Alison Peters, NBN News.
After an ordinary start to the season, BHP Austral have lifted their game in recent weeks with a stirring win over State League leaders Sutherland and an equally impressive win over Warringah Freshwater. Add to that an entertaining draw against old foes Canberra Metros, and it's easy to see why the club is optimistic about tomorrow's match against Rockdale at home. Austral have a good record against the Sydney Siders and in April this year played a 2-2 draw with Rockdale. Austral will also be boosted by the return of David Lowe to the side, and Lowe along with Nick Meredith and informed Bobby Namoff will provide awesome firepower for Austral up front. Given the new enthusiasm out at Birmingham Gardens, Austral should add more points to their season tally so far.